Jordan and Malcolm King had never known a world where they were apart. Born just minutes apart, they had entered the world together, their mother whispering their names as if she knew that the two souls she had brought into this life would never truly be separate. From the moment they could walk, they had been side by side, fighting over the last cookie, sharing whispered secrets under the covers when they were supposed to be asleep, and later, standing shoulder to shoulder against a world that often seemed too eager to push them down. But no matter what life threw at them, they always had each other. They had survived the kind of childhood that made boys into warriors. The streets of Atlanta had their own way of teaching survival, and while they had a mother who worked herself to the bone to keep them on the right path, they had still learned the unspoken rules of being young black men in America. Hands visible, voice calm, never run, no matter how scared you are. Malcolm had been the fire, bold, reckless, always the first to jump into trouble with a grin on his face and a dare in his eyes. Jordan, on the other hand, had been the steel, silent, calculating, always watching, always ready to clean up the messes his twin left behind. And then they joined the army. If the streets had made them warriors, the military had turned them into legends. Together, they had fought battles on foreign soil, had seen men break under the weight of war, had survived things that should have killed them. But instead of destroying them, the fire and steel that had always defined them only burned hotter. Their unit had called them the Revenants. Soldiers whispered their names like folklore because when the twins were sent on a mission, they always came back. No matter how brutal the fight, no matter how impossible the odds, Jordan and Malcolm returned every time, carrying the scars of battle, but never the stain of defeat. They had saved lives, pulled men out of fire, faced death so many times that it no longer felt real. When bullets rained down and the world turned to chaos, it was Malcolm's voice in Jordan's ear, always laughing in the face of destruction, always daring the universe to try and take him. "Come on, little brother," Malcolm would say with that cocky grin, even though he was only 5 minutes older. "You really think this is how we go out?" And Jordan would smirk back, steady and unshaken. "Not today. Not today." Those words had become their prayer, their unspoken oath, but war had a way of taking pieces of a man, even the ones who always came back. The day their time in Delta Force ended, they had walked away carrying ghosts. They never spoke about what they had done, the things they had seen. Some nights, Jordan would wake up to Malcolm sitting on the balcony, staring into the dark, lost in memories of men they couldn't save. Other nights, it was Jordan who sat awake, his breath heavy, his hands still feeling the weight of a rifle that was no longer there. They never talked about it. They didn't need to. Instead, they built a new life. Jordan took up private security work, keeping his skills sharp but finding some semblance of peace. Malcolm, always restless, dabbled in everything from personal training to mentoring troubled youth. They stayed in Atlanta, close to their sister Nia, who had traded the battles of war for the battles of the courtroom. She was a lawyer now, fighting for the people the system had abandoned, and her brothers supported her with everything they had. But the world did not care that they had fought for their country, that they had bled and sacrificed and given more than most men ever would. The world only saw two black men who, despite their discipline, their training, and their loyalty, would always be seen as a threat. And one night, in a neighborhood where they did not belong, that truth would reveal itself in the worst way possible. That night, only one brother would walk away. And for the first time in their lives, Jordan would be truly alone. And that was something the world was not prepared for. The city had always had its own rhythm, a pulse that never slowed, a beat that never silenced. Jordan and Malcolm had grown up within that rhythm, learned to move with it, survive within it. They had always known what it meant to be black men in America. The silent rules, the unspoken threats, the careful balancing act of dignity and survival. But they had never thought it would come to this. The night had started with nothing but the promise of peace. Malcolm had just returned from a work trip, and Jordan, always the planner, had insisted on a quiet evening, a drive through their childhood neighborhood, a stop at Ava's house, a chance to sit together, to remember that no matter where life took them, they still had each other. The charger moved smoothly through the streets, its engine a low purr against the silence of the suburbs. Malcolm was behind the wheel, his fingers drumming lightly against the steering wheel, his gaze flicking between the road and the streetlights that lined the manicured lawns. Jordan sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, watching the world roll past. Man, you ever notice how all these neighborhoods look the same? Malcolm mused, shaking his head slightly. Jordan smirked. That's the point. Copy-paste the American dream. Make sure every house looks safe. Make sure everyone inside knows who belongs and who doesn't. Malcolm scoffed. Yeah, and we don't. Jordan sighed, leaning his head against the window. We do tonight. We're here to see Ava. We're here to eat, drink, and be reminded that not everything in the world is garbage. Malcolm nodded, his jaw still tight. Yeah, just hope the rest of the world got the memo. Jordan felt it before he saw it. The weight of eyes on them, the feeling of being watched, judged, marked. Then Malcolm's voice dropped, steady but edged. Cop car, left side. Jordan didn't turn his head. He didn't need to. They already spotted us? Yep, just passed. Marked unit, I can feel it. Jordan exhaled slowly. Keep driving normal. Malcolm let out a humorless chuckle. Like that ever matters. And then came the lights. Blue and red, flashing against the night, demanding obedience. Malcolm flicked on the turn signal because, God forbid, they give them a reason to claim they were non-compliant, and pulled the charger to the curb. The street was quiet, the only sound the distant hum of a sprinkler and the rustling of trees in the evening wind. All right, Jordan muttered, shifting slightly in his seat. Let me do the talking. Malcolm's jaw tensed. And what's that going to change? Nothing, Jordan admitted, but it might keep us breathing. A shadow moved across the car. A flashlight beam cut through the window, pausing too long on their faces, on their hands. Then came the voice. Gruff, authoritative, a voice that had already made up its mind. License and registration. Jordan kept his hands visible, slow and deliberate. It's in the glove compartment. I'm reaching for it now. He moved carefully, exaggerating the slowness, because he had been trained for this. He had done this dance before. The second officer, the one who had been standing near Malcolm's side, took a step closer. Jordan caught the way his hand hovered near his belt, near the gun that was holstered there. Where are you two headed tonight? Jordan handed over the documents. To our sister's house. She lives a few blocks up. The first officer barely glanced at the ID before shifting his stance. The second one, Briggs, stepped closer to Malcolm's window. Step out of the car. Jordan felt it, the shift in energy, the silent escalation. Malcolm exhaled sharply. Why? Briggs smirked. Because I said so. Jordan spoke before Malcolm could. Officer, we'd like to know the reason for this stop. We've complied with every request. The first officer, Reynolds, finally spoke. There's been reports of break-ins in the area. You match the description. Malcolm let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Oh yeah, what's that description? Black and breathing? Briggs's eyes narrowed. Step out of the car, now. Jordan saw the way Malcolm's fingers twitched, saw the way his jaw tightened. Mal, he said quietly. Malcolm exhaled slowly, then reached for the door handle. The second the door clicked open, Briggs's hand flew to his holster. The world was about to turn deadly. Malcolm stepped out first, slow, measured, his every movement deliberate as he rose to his full height. He was taller than Briggs, broader, stronger. But none of that mattered. The officers didn't see that. They saw a threat. Jordan followed, mirroring his brother's movements, placing himself just slightly ahead, his stance protective without being confrontational. The night air was sharp. Or maybe that was just the edge of something far more dangerous creeping in. Turn around, hands on the car. Jordan stiffened. For what? Briggs smirked. Because I said so. Malcolm's patience snapped. You got a real bad habit of saying that like it means something. Briggs arched a brow. Yeah? You got a problem with that? Malcolm's jaw clenched. Yeah, I got a problem with some punk throwing me up against my own damn car like I just knocked over a liquor store. Briggs's smirk widened. Listen to your brother, boy, he muttered, the last word sliding off his tongue like venom. The night shattered. Malcolm twisted, his breath sharp, his body coiled like a loaded spring. Jordan moved instantly, pressing forward, shoulder against Malcolm's, blocking him, stopping him. Mal, stop, Jordan warned, his voice steady but urgent. Not here, not now. Briggs's smirk widened. He was waiting for this. Then his hand moved, Fast, a shout, a struggle, and then the gunshot. Malcolm jerked, his body snapped backward. For a second, nothing made sense. Then Jordan saw the blood. Malcolm's breath hitched, a sound halfway between shock and disbelief before he crumpled onto the pavement. Jordan lunged forward, but hands yanked him back. He hit the ground hard, a boot pressing into his spine, his wrists twisted behind him, metal biting into his skin. "You think you can attack us?" Briggs snarled, his breath hot against Jordan's ear. Jordan barely heard him. His eyes were locked on Malcolm. His brother lay sprawled just feet away, his chest barely rising, his fingers twitching weakly, his lips parting slightly as if he was trying to say something. Jordan dragged himself forward, his body screaming in protest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Malcolm, hold on, man." Malcolm coughed, a wet, ragged sound. His fingers twitched, found Jordan's sleeve. His grip was weak, his lips trembled. "Don't let them get away with this." Then his breath stilled, and Jordan felt something inside him die. Jordan sat in the back of the squad car, his wrists bound so tightly behind his back that his fingers were starting to go numb. The cold metal of the cuffs dug into his skin, each pulse of his heartbeat pressing the sharp edges deeper. But the pain didn't register, not fully, because Malcolm's blood was still warm on his hands. The ride to the precinct was silent, except for the crackle of the radio. Reynolds and Briggs weren't speaking, but Jordan could hear their breathing, could feel their presence like a weight pressing down on him. He could hear the distant wail of another siren somewhere in the city, another tragedy unfolding in a place where the cameras wouldn't catch it, where the headlines wouldn't care. His mind kept replaying it, the sound of the gunshot, the way Malcolm's body had jerked, the way his breath had hitched, like he hadn't believed it either, like he had still been waiting for someone to step in and stop it from happening. And then the last words, "Don't let them get away with this." Jordan clenched his jaw, staring at his reflection in the dirty window. Briggs had murdered his brother, and the system was already moving to protect him. At the station, Jordan was dragged from the car and marched inside, past rows of officers who barely glanced at him. Some of them knew him. He had trained with a few of them. He had fought for this country, bled for it, and yet none of that mattered now. The moment Malcolm had hit the ground, the moment his body had gone still, Jordan had become just another suspect. Reynolds pushed him into a chair in an interrogation room, the walls bare, the single light overhead casting harsh shadows on the floor. Jordan sat still, his body stiff, the grief twisting inside him, heavy and sharp. The door opened, and Briggs walked in. The bastard was calm. His uniform wasn't even wrinkled. His expression was carefully composed, almost bored. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who knew the rules didn't apply to him, who had spent years doing exactly what he had done tonight and never facing a single consequence for it. Jordan exhaled slowly, his eyes locked on the officer as he leaned against the table, arms crossed. "You messed up, Carter," Briggs said. Jordan didn't speak, didn't move. Briggs tilted his head slightly, studying him, as if he was deciding how much of the truth he wanted to bother pretending with. "You fought us," he continued. "You resisted. Your brother tried to attack an officer. He reached for a weapon." Jordan let out a slow breath through his nose. Malcolm hadn't reached for anything, but that wouldn't matter, because the people who had the power to decide the truth weren't the ones who had been there. Briggs leaned in slightly. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit here while we process the charges. Resisting arrest, assaulting an officer, maybe obstruction of justice, if I feel like adding a little more weight to it." Jordan felt the rage burn hotter, but he forced himself to stay still. Briggs smirked. "And in the meantime, your brother's name will be dragged through the dirt. The press will get a nice little story about how he was dangerous, about how he had a record, about how he was no angel." Jordan's fingers curled into fists beneath the cuffs. Briggs saw it, and he smiled. "And me?" Briggs continued, his voice lowering slightly. "I'll be the hero, the brave officer who had no choice but to defend himself." Jordan finally spoke. His voice was quiet but steady. "You murdered him," Briggs shrugged. "That's not how the report's gonna read." Jordan let the silence stretch between them. He had seen men like Briggs before. Had been sent into war zones to clean up the messes they made. had watched them kill with impunity, certain that nothing would ever come back to haunt them. The difference was, this time Jordan wasn't here to protect them. Briggs finally pushed himself off the table, straightening his uniform. You should start thinking about what kind of deal you want. Maybe if you cooperate, I'll make sure you don't do too much time. Jordan stared at him. Briggs smirked. Then he left the room. Jordan didn't know how long he sat there. Minutes, maybe hours. Then the door opened again, and Ava walked in. His sister. The lawyer. The only person in this world who had ever been able to hold her own against him and Malcolm. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she strode in, her expression set like stone, her eyes burning with something dark and furious. She wasn't crying. Ava never cried when she was angry. She stopped in front of him, exhaled slowly, then looked at the cuffs on his wrists. "Take them off," she said. Reynolds, who had been standing in the doorway, shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, take them off." Her voice was calm, but the kind of calm that promised destruction. Reynolds hesitated, then he moved forward and unlocked them. Jordan rubbed his wrists as Ava sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "They're already spinning it, Jay. I just saw the news. Malcolm was uncooperative. He posed a threat." She swallowed, her throat tightening. "They're painting him as a thug, as someone who deserved it." Jordan clenched his jaw. Ava stared at him. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened. No details left out." Jordan told her. And by the time he was done, Ava's hands were clenched into fists. "They think they can just," she inhaled sharply. "I'm gonna fight this. I'm gonna tear them apart." Jordan shook his head. "Ava?" "Don't," she snapped. "Don't tell me to let this go. Don't tell me to play it smart. Not this time. Not with Malcolm." Jordan studied her. And he knew. She wasn't gonna let this go. Neither of them were. But Ava still believed in the law. In the system. Jordan didn't. He had spent too many years seeing how power really worked, and Briggs had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Because Jordan wasn't going to fight this in court. He was going to make sure Briggs never had a chance to lie again. Jordan stepped out of the precinct into the cool night air, the weight of everything pressing down on him like a boulder strapped to his chest. Ava walked beside him, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning every face, every movement, as if she expected another ambush. And she wasn't wrong to be cautious. The system wasn't finished with him yet. The moment the doors had shut behind them, the cameras had started flashing. Reporters shoved microphones in his face, shouting over each other with carefully crafted headlines meant to fit the police department's version of events. Jordan Carter, arrested after the fatal police shooting of his twin brother, released on bail. Sources confirm Carter, a former Special Forces operative, was combative with officers. Did Malcolm Carter resist? Questions arise over the actions that led to the fatal encounter. Jordan clenched his jaw as Ava gripped his arm and forced him forward. "Don't say anything," she muttered under her breath. "They're baiting you." They reached the car and Ava yanked the door open. "Get in." Jordan slid into the passenger seat, and before he could even take a breath, Ava peeled out of the lot, tires screeching against the pavement. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Ava exhaled sharply, her grip white-knuckled on the wheel. "They're covering it up." Jordan didn't answer. "They already started leaking stories about Malcolm," she continued, her voice sharp. "The news is running pieces about his troubled past. They dug up an arrest from 5 years ago. Disorderly conduct, which was thrown out, but they're making it sound like he was some kind of career criminal." Jordan inhaled slowly, forcing himself to keep his breathing steady. "I got calls from every major news outlet," Ava muttered. "They don't want my statement, they want a soundbite. They want me to break, to cry, to get angry on camera so they can paint us as emotional, irrational. They want to control the narrative before we even get a chance to speak." She finally glanced at him, her knuckles still tight around the wheel. "They're doing exactly what we knew they would do, Jay. They're erasing him." Jordan's fingers twitched, his mind racing, his body taut with the kind of control that barely held back the rage burning in his chest. He had seen this before. Men in power rewriting the truth before the bodies were even cold. They were pushing the story they needed, that Malcolm had been a threat, that the officers had no choice, that it was a tragedy, but ultimately unavoidable. Jordan knew the game, and he was done playing by their rules. Back at Ava's apartment, she dropped onto the couch, rubbing her temples. "I have a plan," she said. Jordan leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I already know what it is. You're going to file civil suits. You're going to push for an independent investigation. You're going to get every activist and journalist with a conscience to cover this story until they have no choice but to answer for it." Ava looked at him. "Yeah," she said. "And you don't think it's enough?" Jordan exhaled slowly. "It won't be. You know that. This isn't the first time cops have gotten away with murder. You think they're afraid of some bad press?" He shook his head. "They've already buried worse than this." Ava studied him carefully. "And what's your plan?" Jordan didn't answer right away, because the truth was, he wasn't sure how far he was willing to go yet. But he knew one thing. Briggs and Reynolds had made a mistake. They thought Malcolm's life didn't matter. They thought Jordan was just another grieving brother who would rage for a while, maybe hold some press conferences, maybe even show up to a protest or two. They thought he would mourn. They didn't realize that he wasn't just mourning. He was hunting. The next morning, Jordan started with the only thing that mattered: information. He knew how to track people, how to study their patterns, how to anticipate their movements, and Briggs and Reynolds weren't nearly as careful as they thought they were. Briggs lived alone, a small house in a quiet, mostly white neighborhood, the kind of place where people trusted cops blindly, where they never asked too many questions about the men who carried guns and badges. Reynolds had an apartment downtown. He spent most of his nights drinking at a bar 3 blocks from the precinct. He was sloppier, less disciplined, the kind of man who had spent his whole life letting someone else make the tough decisions for him. Jordan watched them. For 2 days, he followed their routines, never getting too close, never making his presence known. And what he saw only confirmed what he already knew. They weren't worried. They weren't scared. Briggs walked through his neighborhood like a king surveying his land. He smiled at his neighbors, chatted with the mailman, waved at the joggers passing by. The blood on his hands hadn't even dried yet, and he was already moving on. Reynolds laughed loudly in the bar, his arms slung over the back of a booth, drinking whiskey like a man with no conscience. Jordan watched as another cop leaned in, grinning. "You and Briggs gonna be okay?" Reynolds scoffed. "Please. Standard protocol. A couple weeks of paid leave, then we're right back to it." Jordan's grip tightened around his glass. Another officer chuckled. "That was one hell of a shot, though. You sure that guy didn't have something on him?" Reynolds smirked. "If he did, we'd have found it. Played it, whatever it took. Doesn't matter. That kid sealed his own fate the second he got mouthy." Jordan closed his eyes, breathed. The rage burned like acid in his chest. They weren't just murderers. They were proud of it. They thought Malcolm was just another statistic, and they thought Jordan was just another name to be forgotten. They were wrong. Jordan finished his drink, stood, and walked out of the bar, his hands in his pockets, his mind already turning over the next steps. The system was going to protect them. But the system wasn't built to stop men like Jordan. The night air wrapped around Jordan like a second skin as he moved through the streets, his steps silent, his breath controlled, his body coiled with purpose. He had spent years training for situations like this: urban warfare, counter-surveillance, psychological warfare. But this wasn't a sanctioned mission. There were no orders, no government oversight, no rules of engagement. This was personal. He had studied Reynolds for days. He knew the officer's habits, his movements, the places he went when he thought no one was watching. And now, it was time to make the first move. Not to kill. Not yet. Jordan wanted him to feel it first, wanted him to live in it, breathe in it, drown in the terror of knowing that something was coming for him, something he couldn't see, something he couldn't stop. Because Malcolm had died afraid. And now, so would they. 10:45 p.m. The Rusty Nail Bar. Reynolds was inside, exactly where Jordan knew he would be. Same booth, same whiskey, same smug arrogance radiating off him like he was untouchable. Jordan leaned against the wall outside, his hoodie pulled low over his face, his breath slow, his hands loose at his sides. Patience. It wasn't about hitting him now. It was about setting the stage, controlling the narrative, making sure Reynolds started seeing shadows in every dark alley, hearing footsteps that weren't there, feeling the walls closing in. Jordan had taken down cartel lieutenants, warlords, men who had spent their entire lives killing and never once feared for their own. He knew the steps. He knew how to make a man break long before the first blow ever landed. And tonight, Reynolds would take the first step toward that breaking point. 11:30 p.m., the walk home. Reynolds left the bar alone like he always did. A slight stagger in his step, just buzzed enough to dull his reflexes, but not enough to stop him from pulling a trigger. Jordan followed. Not close enough to be seen. Just enough to make sure that when the moment came, it hit with full force. Reynolds turned the corner onto a quiet street, his footsteps echoing against the pavement. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows. Jordan moved fast, closing the distance in seconds. A hand over the officer's mouth, a sharp yank into the alley, a violent shove against the cold brick wall. Reynolds grunted, struggling, but Jordan was faster, stronger, trained in ways Reynolds couldn't even begin to understand. And then, Jordan whispered in his ear, "Do you feel that?" Reynolds stiffened. That's fear. A cold hand clamped around his throat, squeezing just enough to steal his breath but not enough to crush his windpipe. Jordan leaned in, his voice lower than a whisper. "It's the same thing Malcolm felt when you threw him against that car. The same thing he felt when you shoved your knee into his back. The same thing he felt when Briggs pulled that trigger and you stood there like a coward." Reynolds made a choked sound, his body rigid. Jordan tightened his grip. "This is just the beginning." Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. Reynolds gasped, collapsing to his knees, his hands shaking as he scrambled to pull his gun, aiming wildly into the darkness. Nothing. The street was empty. Jordan had disappeared like a ghost, but the damage was done. Reynolds knew now. He wasn't safe. 1 a.m., Reynolds' apartment. Jordan watched from the rooftop across the street as Reynolds practically ran into his building, slamming the door shut behind him. The officer had checked over his shoulder 4 times on the way home, his hands shaking, his breath coming fast. He had pulled his gun twice. At nothing. Jordan smirked. The seed had been planted. Now he would water it with paranoia, let it fester, let it consume him. By the time Jordan was ready to make his next move, Reynolds would be a wreck. Sleep-deprived, desperate, and desperate men made mistakes. Jordan would be there when he did. Reynolds had always been an arrogant man. He carried himself like the world was his playground, like the badge on his chest made him untouchable, like every person he beat down, arrested, or terrorized was just another insignificant mark on his record. But tonight, as he sat in his dark apartment, a half-empty whiskey bottle clutched in his trembling fingers, he didn't feel untouchable. He felt hunted. Every creak in the walls, every shadow shifting across the window, every gust of wind scraping against the glass, his nerves were raw, stretched to the breaking point. His gun sat on the table in front of him, fully loaded, safety off, barrel pointed toward the door. His hand never left it. Something was coming for him. Someone. And he knew exactly who. 2:30 a.m. Inside Reynolds' apartment. The television was on, but Reynolds wasn't watching. The news anchor droned on about rising crime rates, about new police reforms, about public protests. The city was restless, teetering on the edge of something bigger. The people were angry, and they should be. Because they didn't know the truth. They didn't know that Malcolm Carter never resisted. They didn't know that Briggs had been looking for an excuse to pull that trigger. They didn't know that the reports had been falsified, the evidence buried, the body cam footage lost. But Jordan knew. And that's what terrified Reynolds the most. He didn't know how much Jordan had uncovered. He didn't know what was coming next. But he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't fight a ghost. A sudden thud outside the window made Reynolds jump, his heart hammering in his chest. His grip on the gun tightened, his breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. He swallowed hard. He was losing it. His eyes flicked toward the window, but there was nothing there. Just darkness. Just his own reflection staring back at him. Wide-eyed, frantic, drenched in sweat. Then, the power went out. Everything plunged into darkness. Reynolds sucked in a sharp breath, nearly knocking over his whiskey bottle as he stumbled to his feet. His pulse pounded in his ears, his grip on the gun tightening until his knuckles turned white. This isn't happening. This isn't happening. The room was silent, too silent. Then came the whisper. You don't look so untouchable now. Reynolds spun, his gun raised, his finger jerking against the trigger. Bang, bang, bang. The shots tore through the room, shattering a lamp, punching holes in the drywall. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. His own breath was ragged, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped the gun. There was no one there. Just shadows, just silence. His hands were slick with sweat as he fumbled for his phone, dialing Briggs with trembling fingers. Pick up, damn it, he muttered, pacing the room, his breath coming in short, desperate bursts. The call rang, and rang, and rang. Then finally, click. Reynolds. Briggs's voice was calm. Too calm. It's him, Briggs. He's coming for us. A pause. Then, chuckling. I know. Reynolds froze. What? He's already watching you, isn't he? Briggs murmured. You're sweating, hands shaking, gun in your lap. Lights off. You think shooting at shadows is gonna save you? Reynolds swallowed. Briggs, listen to me. We need to get ahead of this. We need to. No, Reynolds. Briggs interrupted. His voice was as cold as steel. You need to pull yourself together. You're acting weak. That's exactly what he wants. He's playing you, just like he played those insurgents overseas. You think this is his first hunt? He's a goddamn predator and you're prey. So either you start thinking like a hunter, or you're dead. Reynolds was shaking his head, his free hand gripping his hair. You don't get it, man. He was here. Briggs exhaled slowly. No, he wasn't. What? He was never in your apartment, Reynolds. He never touched you. He didn't need to. A sickening realization settled over Reynolds. Jordan had never laid a hand on him. And yet, he was already breaking. Meanwhile, Jordan's safe house. Jordan sat in a darkened motel room, watching the screen of his laptop, the flickering feed of a small surveillance camera he had placed outside Reynolds' apartment building. Reynolds was pacing, sweating, spiraling. Jordan smirked. This was how you broke a man before you ever threw a punch. Reynolds had done this to so many others, beaten them, humiliated them, stripped them of their dignity. But what Reynolds had never faced was something worse than physical pain. Helplessness. The knowledge that no one was coming to save him, that his power meant nothing. Jordan leaned back in his chair, rolling his shoulders, one down. Now, it was time to move on to Briggs. Briggs had always been the more dangerous of the two. Reynolds was weak, a follower, a coward, hiding behind a badge. But Briggs was something else entirely. He didn't just enforce injustice, he reveled in it. He thrived on control, on the feeling of bending people to his will, on watching the light leave their eyes as they realized they had no power, no rights, no chance. And Jordan knew exactly what kind of man Briggs was, because he had seen men like him before, overseas, in interrogation rooms, in dark corners of the world where morality meant nothing, and the only law was the one written by men with no conscience. Men like Briggs didn't just kill, they enjoyed it, and that was what made him dangerous. But it was also what made him predictable. 3:45 a.m. Briggs's home. Unlike Reynolds, Briggs wasn't unraveling. He was waiting. He sat in the dark of his living room, gun resting on his thigh, eyes fixed on the door. His pulse was steady. His mind was clear. He had been in situations like this before. Briggs knew that someone like Jordan wouldn't strike without preparation. This wasn't some street thug looking for revenge. This was a tactician, a soldier, someone who had spent years perfecting the art of hunting men. That meant patience. That meant calculation. And that meant Briggs had to stay ahead of him. His phone buzzed on the table. He picked it up, glancing at the screen. Blocked number. His lips curled into a smirk. He answered. You there, Carter? He murmured. Silence. Then a voice. You sound awfully calm for a man who knows what's coming. Briggs chuckled, leaning back into his chair. Because I'm not Reynolds, you think you can break me? Make me scared? He let out a low, amused breath. I've seen fear, Carter. I've heard men beg for their lives. I've heard them cry for their mothers. And you know what? I don't feel a damn thing when they do. A pause. Not even for Malcolm? Briggs grinned. Especially not for Malcolm. Another pause, longer this time. Then Jordan's voice came back, lower now, controlled. I want you to remember those words. Oh, don't worry. I will. Briggs exhaled slowly, eyes flicking toward the security camera feed on his laptop. You think I don't know what you're doing? You want me to second-guess every shadow? You want me to wonder if you're outside right now, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? He let out another slow breath. But the thing is, Carter, I don't run, and I don't hide. If you want me, come get me. Silence. Then, I will. The line went dead. Briggs set the phone down. Then he smiled. He wanted to see how far Carter was willing to go, because Briggs, he was willing to go all the way. 4:12 a.m., Jordan's location. Jordan sat in the shadows of an abandoned warehouse, watching the monitors in front of him. Briggs thought he was in control. That was his first mistake. He had studied Briggs' movements, his routines, his habits, and the one thing he had learned? Briggs was too confident for his own good. He thought being ready meant being safe. But no one was safe when they were being hunted. Jordan adjusted his earpiece, his gaze shifting to the screen showing a live feed of Briggs' house. A man like Briggs didn't rely on security systems, he relied on fear. He relied on his reputation to keep people from even thinking about coming after him. But Jordan wasn't people. He was something else. And tonight, he was going to prove it. 4:30 a.m. inside Briggs's home. The house was silent. Briggs sat unmoving in his chair, fingers drumming lightly against the side of his gun. He could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the house settling. He had locked every door, checked every window. There was no way in. And yet, something felt wrong. His instincts were sharp, always had been, and right now they were screaming at him. He stood slowly, rolling his shoulders, keeping his grip firm on the gun as he moved toward the kitchen. The darkness felt heavier somehow, like it was pressing in, like it was waiting. He stepped past the counter and stopped. The back door was unlocked, his breath stilled. That wasn't possible. He had locked it. Briggs clenched his jaw, his grip tightening around the gun. Then, the lights flickered. Just for a second, just long enough to make his heart pound harder in his chest. Then came the whisper, right behind him. "Not so fun when it's you, is it?" Briggs spun, gun raised, but there was nothing there, just the empty hallway. His own ragged breath filled the silence. Then, the phone rang. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing as he glanced at the table. The screen glowed in the darkness. No caller ID. He picked it up. "Did you lock the basement door?" Briggs' stomach twisted, because there was no basement. And he had heard that voice before. Not over the phone, not on the news, but in the streets. On the night Malcolm Carter died. The voice of a man Briggs had arrested years ago. A man who was supposed to be dead. And then, just before the call cut off, "I'm inside." Briggs had never been afraid before. Not really. Fear was something he had always inflicted on others. He had seen it in their eyes, in their trembling hands, in the way their breath hitched just before they broke. But now it was his own breath that was unsteady. His own fingers tightening around his gun, his own heartbeat hammering against his ribs in a rhythm he didn't recognize. This wasn't fear. This was something worse. Because for the first time in his life, Briggs didn't know what was coming next. 4:45 a.m., Briggs' home. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to move, to think. His mind raced through the possibilities. He had checked every door, every window. The house was locked down tight. No one had come in. No one could have come in. But the phone call. "I'm inside." Briggs exhaled sharply through his nose, rolling his shoulders to force the tension out of them. It's a trick. Jordan was playing mind games, trying to get under his skin, trying to make him doubt himself. It wouldn't work. Briggs wasn't Reynolds. He didn't scare easy. He turned, moving back toward the living room, his gun steady in his grip. He wasn't gonna let some washed-up soldier turn him into a coward in his own damn house. No way in hell. But then, a sound, a slow, deliberate creak from upstairs. Briggs froze, his pulse spiked, adrenaline slamming through his veins. The second floor was empty. He lived alone. No one was up there, but something was. His grip on the gun tightened, and then, another creak. Briggs turned toward the staircase, eyes narrowing. He could feel it now. The shift in the air, the weight of something unseen pressing down on him. It was like being watched. No, it was worse. It was like being hunted. Briggs gritted his teeth. "All right, Carter," he muttered under his breath, slowly moving toward the stairs. "You want to play? Let's play." He took the first step, then the second. The old wood groaned under his weight, the sound cutting through the silence like a blade. By the time he reached the top of the stairs, The house felt different. Colder, darker. Briggs exhaled through his nose, forcing his heartbeat to steady as he moved toward the first door. His bedroom. He reached out, fingers curling around the handle. Then, in one swift motion, he shoved it open. Nothing. Just the empty room. The bed neatly made, the curtains undisturbed. His jaw clenched. It's a trick. It's all a trick. He turned toward the next door. The guest room. His fingers flexed around the gun as he stepped forward. Then, a whisper. Briggs. His breath caught. The voice had come from inside the room. Briggs' stomach twisted, his mind scrambling for an explanation. There wasn't one. His grip on the gun tightened. Then, without hesitation, he raised it and kicked the door open. The room was empty. No one there. Nothing but the neatly arranged furniture, the stale air hanging heavy in the dark. And yet, he could still feel it. Something was wrong. Briggs exhaled sharply through his nose, stepping inside, his eyes sweeping every corner. Nothing. Then he turned back toward the door. And froze. Because suddenly, the mirror on the far wall wasn't empty. There was a figure standing behind him. 4:52 a.m., outside Briggs' home. Jordan stood in the shadows, watching. He had spent years hunting men like Briggs, men who thought they were invincible, men who had never been truly powerless a day in their lives, men who never knew what it felt like to have no control. But tonight, Briggs was learning. Jordan could see it in the way he moved, the way his posture changed, the way his breath caught just a little too sharply. The first cracks were forming. Briggs wasn't just scared. He was breaking. Jordan let out a slow breath, adjusting his stance. He had promised Malcolm justice, and that meant Briggs wasn't dying easy. Not yet. First, he was going to understand. He was going to feel every second of it, just like Malcolm had. Jordan's fingers flexed. It was time. He stepped forward, melting into the darkness. 4:54 a.m., inside Briggs' home. Briggs was frozen in place. His reflection stared back at him, and the figure standing behind him didn't move. It was tall, broad-shouldered, its face obscured by the dim light. But Briggs didn't need to see its face to know who it was. His blood ran cold. Because Malcolm Carter was dead. He had watched him die. He had felt the recoil of the gun in his hand. He had seen the blood on the pavement. So how? Not so fun, is it? The whisper was right next to his ear. Briggs spun, gun raised, but there was nothing there. Just the empty room. The door slammed shut behind him. Briggs fired, once, twice, the gunshots shattering the silence. Then, the lights went out. The darkness swallowed him whole. Briggs stood frozen in the dark, his breath shallow and unsteady. The air in the room felt thick, pressing in on him from all sides. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the distant ringing in his ears from the gunshots he had fired. His grip on the gun was tight, his knuckles white. He had always been the one in control, the one dictating how things played out. But now, control had slipped from his fingers like sand through a clenched fist. He swallowed, forcing himself to steady his breathing. There was no one here, no ghosts, no demons, just shadows playing tricks on his mind. That's what he told himself. Yet deep inside, a part of him knew the truth. Jordan Carter was here. Briggs took a cautious step toward the door, but before his hand could reach the handle, something shifted in the air behind him. He spun around, gun raised, but there was nothing. Just the dim outline of the furniture against the darkness. His heartbeat pounded against his ribs. Then he heard it. A slow, deliberate breath. Not his own. Briggs turned, moving too quickly. His shoulders slammed into the doorframe, and for the first time in his life, his hands shook. He tightened his grip on the gun, sweat slicking his palm. "You thought you were untouchable, didn't you?" The voice was low, calm, a voice that didn't need to shout to be heard. Briggs turned sharply, his gun moving toward the sound. Nothing, but he knew the voice. It was Jordan Carter. Briggs's mouth felt dry, his pulse thundering. He had never faced a threat like this before. He had faced criminals, protesters, people who screamed at him from behind handcuffs, but never someone like Jordan. Jordan wasn't yelling. He wasn't begging. He wasn't asking for justice. He was here to deliver it. "You're a dead man," Briggs spat, forcing himself to sound confident. "You think you're some kind of ghost? I don't care who you were in the military. I've got the entire force looking for you. You think this ends with me?" Jordan didn't respond right away. Briggs felt the weight of silence pressing down on him. He had spent his career using silence against others, letting it stretch until the person in front of him cracked under its weight. But now, he was the one who couldn't stand it. "You don't get it," Jordan said finally, his voice closer this time. "This isn't about ending with you. This is about making sure you understand before I take away everything you thought made you powerful." Briggs lunged toward the sound, swinging the gun in a wide arc, but his hands hit only air. His breath hitched, a sharp exhale, and he forced himself to stay still. Control. He needed to get control. "You have no idea what kind of man I am," Briggs growled. "You think I regret what I did? Your brother was nothing. Just another thug who thought he could challenge the law. He got what was coming to him." The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them. Not because he didn't believe them, he had convinced himself of that lie long ago, but because of the silence that followed. A silence that carried weight. A silence that felt like standing on the edge of something vast, something inescapable. Then Jordan spoke again, his voice so close that Briggs swore he could feel the heat of his breath. "You keep talking about Malcolm like he was nothing," Jordan said, his voice steady, unshaken. "Like the people you've brutalized meant nothing. You act like you're above consequence, like you get to decide who deserves to live and who doesn't." Briggs's eyes darted wildly in the dark, searching for movement. Then, pain. A sharp, precise strike to the side of his wrist sent his gun clattering to the floor. He lunged after it, but before his fingers could reach it, a heavy boot pressed down on his hand, grinding his knuckles into the hardwood. A sharp crack of pain shot through his fingers. Briggs clenched his teeth, swallowing the pained gasp that threatened to escape. "You're used to power," Jordan continued. "Used to being the one who gets to decide." The pressure on his hand increased. Briggs struggled, but it was useless. Jordan knew exactly how to hold him down, how to take away his ability to fight back without even breaking a sweat. "You want power?" Jordan said, his voice low. "Let me show you what power really feels like." Briggs barely had time to register the words before he was yanked up by his collar and slammed against the wall. His breath left him in a sharp gasp, his ribs screaming in protest. His legs scrambled for balance, but Jordan's grip was like iron. "You ever feel helpless before?" Jordan asked. Briggs didn't respond. He couldn't. Jordan's hand tightened around his throat, not enough to choke him, not yet, but enough to remind him of who was in control now. "You're gonna feel it now," Jordan said quietly, "the same way Malcolm did." Briggs' mind raced, searching for a way out, but for the first time in his life, there wasn't one. There was no backup coming. No badge to hide behind, no system to protect him, just the dark, and Jordan Carter. Briggs gasped, his throat constricted under the pressure of Jordan's grip. His body thrashed instinctively, his hands clawing at the iron-like fingers wrapped around his neck, but it was useless. He had spent his career asserting his dominance, bending others to his will through force, intimidation, and unchecked power. But now, in this moment, he was nothing. Jordan was in control. Briggs's boots scraped against the hardwood floor as he fought for breath. The air around them was thick with tension, pressing in from all sides. The weight of Jordan's vengeance was suffocating, more so than the hand around his throat. "You don't get to walk away from this," Jordan said, his voice as steady as his grip. "You thought you were a god, that you could take lives and rewrite the truth. But now, I decide how this ends." Briggs's vision blurred as his oxygen supply ran low, and panic clawed at his chest. He wasn't ready to die. Not like this. Not at the hands of someone who was supposed to fear him. His mind raced, searching for an escape, a way to shift the power back into his hands. But there was none. Jordan was an executioner. And Briggs was at his mercy. With a sudden, calculated movement, Jordan yanked him away from the wall and slammed him onto the wooden floor. The impact rattled through Briggs' body, pain shooting through his ribs as he coughed violently, greedily gulping in air. He rolled onto his side, gasping, but before he could regain his bearings, Jordan was already crouched beside him. "You don't get to beg," Jordan muttered, his voice almost eerily calm. "Malcolm didn't get to." Briggs tried to push himself up, but a sharp, deliberate knee dug into his spine, pinning him down. The same way he and Reynolds had pinned Malcolm that night. The realization hit Briggs like a truck. This was what it felt like. "You ever feel fear like this before?" Jordan asked, his breath even. "Ever feel the weight of someone crushing you into the ground, knowing there's nothing you can do?" That no one's coming to help you?" Briggs wheezed, his face pressing against the cold floor. "Please," he choked out. Jordan chuckled, but there was no humor in it, just cold, razor-sharp understanding. "You sound just like Malcolm did." Briggs' body trembled beneath him. He wanted to deny it, to fight back, but there was no room for pride, no space for arrogance anymore. He was powerless, and he knew it. Then suddenly there was a noise, a sharp click, the sound of a hammer being cocked back. Jordan stilled. Briggs' breath caught in his throat. From behind them, a voice cut through the silence, low and dangerous. "Step away from him." Jordan turned his head slowly, his expression unreadable. Standing in the doorway was Ava Carter. The room was frozen in time. Jordan knelt over Briggs, his breath steady, his hands still pressed against the officer's trembling body. Briggs lay sprawled on the floor, gasping for air, his face pale with terror. And in the doorway, gun raised, stood Ava Carter. Her hands were firm around the weapon, but her jaw was tight, tension rippling through her body. She was a woman caught between the lines of justice and vengeance, standing at the breaking point of everything she had believed in. "Step away from him," she repeated, her voice quieter now, but just as firm. Jordan didn't move. He stared at her, his eyes locked onto hers, searching for something, an answer, a sign, anything that would tell him where she stood. Briggs let out a strangled cough beneath him, his body shaking violently. "You're better than this, Jordan," Ava said, her voice softer now. She wasn't pleading, she wasn't demanding, she was stating a fact, a truth she still wanted to believe in. Jordan let out a breath through his nose, slow and controlled. "Am I?" Ava's fingers twitched on the gun. Jordan leaned down, lowering his voice so that only Briggs could hear. "You hear that, Briggs? She still thinks there's a way out for you." His grip on the back of the officer's neck tightened, pressing him further into the floor. "She still believes in laws and trials and fair sentences." Briggs let out a pitiful whimper. Ava's heart pounded against her ribs. "Jordan, look at me." Slowly he did, and for the first time Ava saw everything in his eyes. Not just anger, not just grief, but exhaustion. A man who had lost everything. A man who had already made peace with the fact that he would never walk free again. And that terrified her. "You're going to let the system handle this," she said. Jordan exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. "The system?" He let out a bitter, humorless chuckle. "You still think the system is going to do a damn thing, Ava?" She didn't answer. "Tell me," he continued, his voice eerily calm. "How many times have you stood in a courtroom, arguing your ass off for justice, just to watch those bastards walk away free?" Ava swallowed, but said nothing. "How many times have you won just to see them get reinstated 6 months later?" Ava's lips parted, but she had no words to offer. Jordan shook his head. "I'm tired of waiting for justice that never comes. Malcolm didn't get a second chance, neither should he." His grip on Briggs tightened, his knuckles white with tension. Briggs let out a garbled sob. For the first time since she entered the room, Ava's gaze dropped to the man on the floor. Briggs was a monster, a coward. A man who had killed her brother in cold blood and felt nothing. And yet, "I don't care what he deserves," she finally said. "I care about you." Jordan's jaw clenched. "If you do this, you don't come back from it." Ava took a step forward. "You think you've lost everything now?" "You haven't, not yet." Jordan closed his eyes for a moment, just a second, the weight of her words pressing against him. Briggs was whimpering now, his body trembling so violently that the floor beneath him shook. Jordan could end it, right now, and no one would weep for this man. But Ava was still standing there, still believing in him. "Jordan?" she whispered. "Please." His grip loosened. Ava didn't lower the gun, she didn't move. Then, finally, Jordan let go. Briggs collapsed onto the floor, his breath ragged, his entire body convulsing with relief. He was still too weak to move, too drained from the terror that had just torn through his soul. Jordan pushed himself up to his feet, his shoulders rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. For a long moment, he and Ava just stared at each other. "You should go?" she finally said. Jordan exhaled through his nose. "Yeah." And without another word, he turned and walked past her, disappearing into the night. Jordan disappeared into the night, his steps silent, his pulse steady, but his mind a storm of thoughts. Ava had stopped him, pulled him back from the edge. But had she saved him, or had she only delayed the inevitable? Briggs was still breathing. That alone should have filled Jordan with rage. But instead, there was something else creeping in. A weight that settled deep in his bones. He had made them pay. But had it been enough? Across town, Ava stood in the wreckage of the confrontation. Briggs was slumped against the wall, barely conscious, but alive. For now, she could call it in. Let the department find him. Let the world see him broken, exposed. But that meant the full force of the law would come after Jordan. They would come for him like a pack of wolves. Not because he was guilty, but because he had defied them. Ava clenched her jaw. She had spent her life believing in the law, believing that justice could prevail. But now, standing here, she wasn't so sure anymore. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and hesitated. Then, with a slow exhale, she put it away. By morning, the city was on fire. News broke before sunrise. 2 officers found incapacitated, paralyzed, left to rot like the men they had brutalized for years. One of them still missing. The manhunt was instant. Jordan Carter was officially the most wanted man in the country. They painted him as a vigilante, a killer, a rogue soldier turned criminal, a threat to the very foundation of law enforcement. The truth didn't matter, but Jordan had expected this. For days he moved through the city like a shadow, slipping past roadblocks, staying ahead of the patrols that were hunting him. He knew how this worked. He had been the predator before. Now he was the prey. But he wasn't running. He was waiting. Briggs recovered. Not fully, he would never walk again, but enough to talk. And he did. Jordan was branded a terrorist, a murderer. Everything the system needed him to be in order to erase the truth. Ava fought back. She took the case straight to the people, pushing back against the lies. The evidence was overwhelming. The body cam footage was there. The complaints against Briggs and Reynolds were undeniable. The public began to see the cracks. But the system refused to let go. The police force wanted blood, and they would stop at nothing to get it. Jordan had always known this would end one of 2 ways, prison or death. But there was still one last thing he needed to do. He called Ava. For the first time since that night. "You need to leave town," he said. Ava's breath caught. "Jordan? They're coming for you next," he interrupted. "They think you helped me, and maybe you did. Maybe you didn't. Doesn't matter, they've already decided." Silence. Then Ava exhaled sharply. "I'm not leaving." Jordan clenched his jaw. "Ava? No." Her voice was sharp. "You think you're the only one who gets to fight back? You think this is just your burden to carry?" Jordan closed his eyes for a moment. "You're my brother," she said, softer now. "I'm with you until the end." Jordan sighed. "Then let's end it." The police found him at dawn. It wasn't a raid, it wasn't a takedown, it was an execution. They had no plans to arrest him. They wanted him dead. And Jordan Carter was ready for them. The final fight was brutal, a war between one man and an army. A storm of gunfire, of shadows moving between the buildings, of officers shouting, of orders being screamed. Jordan moved like a ghost, taking them down one by one. But there were too many. A bullet tore through his side, then another. He hit the ground, his breath sharp, his body screaming in agony. But he still fought. Because he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for Malcolm, for every single person Briggs and Reynolds had brutalized, for every name the system had erased. He had sworn not to let them get away with it. And he wouldn't. When Ava arrived, it was already too late. Jordan lay on the pavement, blood pooling beneath him, his breath shallow. The police had stepped back, weapons still raised, but they weren't celebrating. They had won, but they hadn't broken him. Ava ran to him, her hands pressing against his wounds, her breath shaking. "No, no, no. Stay with me." Jordan's fingers twitched, weakly grasping at her wrist. He tried to speak, but no words came. Tears burned in her eyes. "You're not done yet. We're not done." Jordan exhaled, his body going slack. But he wasn't smiling, because he had already won. Briggs and Reynolds were finished. The city had seen the truth. The fight would not end with him. And for the first time in a long time, Jordan Carter was at peace. The world would not forget Jordan Carter. The police tried to bury the truth, but they couldn't. The evidence was everywhere. The protests turned into movements. The streets echoed with the names of the fallen. Malcolm Carter, Jordan Carter, Briggs and Reynolds were destroyed. The department tried to cover for them, but there was no coming back from this. The world was watching. And Ava Carter would not stop fighting. She made sure the story was told. She made sure no one forgot what happened that night. because Jordan had given everything, and she would not let that sacrifice be in vain. Justice was never something given, it had to be taken. And even though Jordan was gone, his fight lived on. He had not let them get away with it.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please support me by clicking the logo in the bottom right corner to subscribe to my channel. This way you won't miss any of the exciting stories coming up. Thank you so much.